Hello everyone, welcome to week 9. As you can see today you have the double act of both Michael and myself. So I'm going to start and we're basically going to play tag team throughout the session. So welcome to week 9. This is the penultimate week. It's the last week of workshops, so we look forward to seeing you face to face for the last time this week. So what are we going to cover this week? We are going to cover, growing the analytics function. And we're going to start by reminding you of how we dealt with evaluating the analytics function all the way back in week 1 when we talked about delta. And then we are going to look about, well, okay, once you've done the delta analysis, you can prioritize the different delta, the delta plus elements. But then what do? We're going to talk you through each of the delta plus elements in terms of how you might improve each of those. So to start off with, just a few slides to take you back to week 1. So in week 1, we started off by saying, why is it that you need to evaluate an analytics function? Well, because you want to make better decisions overall. But in order to evaluate the analytics function, it's helpful to use a framework. And as you can see over on the left-hand side, this is taken from Davenport's very early work before it became Delta Plus or Delta TAR. You can see that we have the delta elements listed there. Okay, and that is helping you to evaluate the analytical culture and business processes. And it's a systematic review. So the idea is that undertaking that, it will help you to make better decisions. So just a quick reminder of the Delta Plus or Delta TAR module. You can see all of the attributes listed in the middle of the slide there, and a little explanation about what you might be aiming for with each of those characteristics. Now, the idea of doing a Delta TAR analysis is you want to think about where you are on your journey to analytics maturity. And this model, taken from Davenport and Harris's later work, shows you 5 different stages, where stage 1 is, if you like, at the start of your journey. They call it analytically impaired, all the way through to stage 5, analytical competitors. So the idea of the Delta TAR, Delta Plus analysis is to help you work out where on that journey you are, but also to think about what areas need improvement, okay? And that then becomes the question of, what should you prioritize? Should you prioritize the development of things that you are good at, your strengths, or should you prioritize developing areas of weakness? So when you do the Delta Plus analysis, we then got you in week 1 to prioritize those Delta Plus elements. So should you work on developing that thing that you gave a priority of 1 to, which perhaps is one of your weaknesses, or should you think about developing some of the other areas? That's something that we're going to return to as we go through this lecture today. So at this point, I'm going to hand you over to Michael, who's going to talk you through what you do beyond working out your priorities of the Delta Plus elements.
Thanks, Francis. Well, I got an electric shot there as well. Did you? Okay. Yeah, I think it's one of those things. It is very easy in many ways to do the analytical work and work out and score these things. You probably have to do it collaboratively, as we discussed. And again, subjective, but we can reach a prioritization. But that's really when the work starts. You've worked out what you want to do. You need to go from that into some tangible, actual work. This also very much mirrors your assessment that you'll no doubt have started or be starting soon. You are asked to do all 3 things. You're asked first to do the delta analysis, the Delta TAR analysis, assess where the company is. You're asked then to prioritize what we're going to work on next, but then lastly, translate that into an actual project and an actual plan for improving something. And that's often the less obvious piece. So the idea today is we're going to work through, we'll spend the vast majority of time on this bullet point here. We're going to use Delta TAR as a framework for thinking about, just walked off the screen, sorry about that. we'll use Delta TAR as a framework for dividing the sorts of analytics work you might do and thinking about how you might make advancements in each area. As you will remember, that takes us both through more technical elements, but also more cultural and organizational elements. And to a large extent, myself and Francis have divided that work accordingly. I'm going to cover mostly the more technical side of things, which obviously includes D for data. I'm going to start with a short video just to set the scene.
Master data. The name can sound intimidating, but the concept is actually quite easy to understand. Master data are the nouns of our business. They are the people, places, ideas, and things across our corporation. Master data is involved in every business group at Intel. Let's take a look at some of the places master data hides out in our day-to-day work. We hire talented employees. An employee designs a new product. We buy material from a supplier. We manufacture products at a plant. We sell products, software, hardware, services, etc., to customers in many languages across many countries. We track our spending and revenue in GL accounts and report out to the street. Master data gives you a single version of the truth that can be reused across your group and across the corporation. It is about making sure our most critical data is represented consistently throughout our systems. Without this shared version of the truth, we sometimes end up with slightly different versions of the same story across our company. Such discrepancies across our systems and databases make automation and integration nearly impossible. Costs and errors increase as we create new roles and hire people to act as human glue across inconsistent systems, or implement additional databases for the sole purpose of mapping two databases together. Master data allows us to avoid these costs and errors, make better decisions, and helps us move faster. As with any data set, it is important that our master data is kept current and relevant. The life cycle of managing master data involves creating it, ability to read it, updating it, and deleting it when it is no longer needed. It takes CRUD to keep track of all of our master data. To master our data, we first establish our business rules. For example, our products will follow XYZ naming convention. Then we set up those rules in a master data management system. People are either assigned the responsibility of creating the data in the MDM system, or data in existing tools is sent to the MDM system for merging and matching. Then the MDM system distributes clean, accurate, and consistent data anywhere it needs to go.
Right, I'm going to pause there, in fact. Stop. Okay, I'll go on to this slide. So this, I'm pulling this up. I was going to pose you the question. Hey, I'll pose it anyway. How many companies do you think follow this kind of approach, the master data management approach? There's a few things that I'm pulling out from it while you have a chance to reply. So this is the idea that we have a real top-down control of our data, that we set up front a bunch of business rules about our data, conventions. We make sure all our data adheres to those rules, and that we have this single version of the truth, that any data item should be stored effectively once in one agreed upon form. How many companies do you think actually follow such an approach? I'll give you three options. Not many, around half, lots of them. What do we think? Not many, not many, not many. Okay, you have the correct answer. Not many is the correct answer. Yeah, that's a fair point there, Arthur, that there are policies, but not necessarily every company, every person in the company follows them. Master data management is an attempt essentially to get around that problem, because we systemize everything. So these rules are built in at a system level, and the data has no option but to follow them. So we think not many. My follow-up question, should every company do this? Should every company have an approach like this one? Getting some no's. A bit slower on this one. No, yes, okay, I've got some disagree. I like an argument in the chat. No, it's costly. Too inefficient, depends. That's the magic answer. Well done. Okay, we've got a good mixture here. There absolutely are a lot of benefits of going to this way. And I'm really holding this up as sort of one extreme perspective. that we have this very controlled system where data is stored just once. Now, for some companies, that absolutely makes sense. If you are a government body, if you are a bank, then having this very reliable single version of the truth becomes a very important thing. But it has costs. It is slow to create. You have to work with subject matter experts to understand what data you have and what those rules should be. Loading and updating data is slow because you have to update the rules before you can change the data. There is a significant speed cost. If compliance is your main concern and accuracy is your main concern, go towards this extreme. But for many companies, they would rather be much more flexible and agile. So the extreme end, the extreme opposite position is to go more towards a data lake kind of architecture, where the idea is that we can hold the same data item multiple times in multiple formats in lots of different systems. We might have traditional relational systems, we'll talk about next term, which have more control and more static data, potentially fast-moving text and image data as well. The idea of a data lake is that we'll throw effectively all of that into the mix. We'll have a storage that is, I can't say, highly parallelized, I really struggle with that word, running across multiple machines, not a single machine, which make it much faster to scale up and scale down based on demands. We'll hold data in the format required for all of the tasks that we want. Every data scientist can specify a different data format for the same data. That also promotes us to have a much more flexible system and a much more heterogeneous system. We'll welcome any kind of data type. But with a cost again, there are now many, many versions of the truth. When you ask any question, the answer you get is, it depends. It depends which version of the data we look at. And it also has a huge technical requirement, for variety of databases, variety of systems. Okay. I'm also pushing this quite heavily at the moment. There's some newer frameworks for data management that have come out, such as data mesh, which is what I'm drawing from here, from the book just up here. Yeah. On data fabric is a similar approach. And these are kind of cutting edge data architectures. The key thing they seek to address is that we end up with silos throughout our data system, that we have a group of people typically who know about the data, who are involved in the creation of the data, sits under their function, payments, for example. They will understand the data they work with and generate. There are other parts of the organization that want to consume said data, but all of that gets siloed between a data engineering team or a data management team, IT basically. All of that gets blocked in between. There is no way to directly access and share that information. So I'm not going to go too much into it, but the idea of these newer frameworks is that we rethink how we store data, and we make data belong to domain expert teams. So the people who understand the data own the data, and we make data engineering basically a service, infrastructure as a service or a platform that people can use, make it low code or no code. And what you allow then is for the individual data owners in cross-functional teams to be able to engineer that data, optimize that data, store metadata about it, and make the data product much more useful across the organization. But it is hard work. Very few companies have got there yet. But I think it becomes even more powerful in the age of AI, where it will be very realistic for our data sets to be mined by AI tools, not just by other systems and human users. Went very quickly through that, but just to give you a flavor, I think I'm ready to hand over to you now, Francis. So we've done D. We will now move on to E.
Are we going to get a shock? No. Right, so enterprise is about how do you organize analytics within the organization. And as we said to you before, if you don't get any buy-in with your analytics, then you're going to get no change, are you? Nothing's going to happen. And equally, if you go ahead and think about deploying analytics within your organization, but nothing changes, it's still going to cost you something to have deployed that analytics. So at this point, I hand briefly back. It was just a little trip.
Yeah. We could have rehearsed this a little bit better. That was a little guest star from Francis there. I said I would cover these cultural models. This is something I've spent some time looking about. So we've talked a fair bit about things like problem structuring and why it's very important to go into an organization and really understand what they're about. In the business school theory space, there's quite a lot of work that has been done categorizing different organizational cultures. And I think the point here is it's important to be aware what are the characteristics of your company, how are decisions made in general, so we can ensure we tailor our efforts to fit in there. So one such model, the Deal and Kennedy's corporate culture model, they carve it up in this way on 2 dimensions. First of all, the amount of risk in the organization's work, and secondly, the speed of feedback. So do we get fast and immediate feedback, or do we get slow and delayed feedback? So we'll start in the top right, the tough guy macho culture. This typically refers, so it's high risk, but a high degree of feedback. The classic example here will be an industry like the stock market, financial services, where you're trading on the stock market. So you have a high risk job, you're making big bets, essentially, and you get nearly immediate feedback that either makes you very rich or makes you bankrupt overnight. You'll remember all the news stories of people crying on the stock market floor when the stock market crash kicked in. So it's a very results orientated, but very aggressive kind of culture. Going along left one, work hard, play hard. This is where we have that high speed. So the speed of feedback is fast, things are happening quickly, but we have far less risk. So a good example here would be something like chefing or kitchens, essentially, an area I've worked in my younger years. So you have this lots of deadlines, lots of things happening, but your degree of risk is certainly somewhat lower than the stock market. If you get an order wrong, you remake the order. The risk is a bit lower. And this leads to a culture that is much more, we work at it, we work our shift, we'll burn our way through it, and then we can, relax. There's not really the same stress level, essentially. Going to the bottom rank, we'll start with bet your company. This has much, much slower feedback, but also that high risk that we saw earlier. Anything that's heavily R&D would be in this space. So something like pharma, where you have to do these expensive, long R&D processes. It takes a very long time to know if that thing is going to work. And obviously with all the costs, there's a high amount of risk in there. Our last box, moving quickly, is a process culture. This is when risk is lower, speed of feedback is lower. So a kind of low stress environment. Probably, I hate to say it, a good example is universities, essentially. Certainly nothing moves fast in universities. And in many ways, certainly compared to pharma or the stock market, the individual risk that people take is much slower. If we're in the bottom left corner, this leads us more to bureaucratic, controlled kind of environments. If we're going towards the top right, that leads us to much more individualistic, high stakes, gambling-y kind of cultures. Which culture you are in will certainly, we talked about risk appetite earlier in the module. Risk appetite will certainly speak to some of these cultural elements. Certainly how the organization wants information and relies on information will change. So that is one model. Model number 2, Cameron and Quinn's competing values framework. They similarly draw across 2 axes, but they're drawing against, is the focus of the company internal or external? Is it more about internal processes, or is it more about external products that we're releasing out there? And then the other axis, the y-axis, relates to how flexible the culture is and how stable it is. How can we get insight? So the question posed in chat is, how can we get insights into what our organization's style is? Is it something that's hard to find from the outside? Absolutely, it's hard to find from the outside. So I'm not necessarily suggesting you do this for your assessment, which I guess is the underlying question. But when you are working in an organization, it's an important thing to keep track of. You should moderate. We talked last week, it was last week, about communication, wasn't it? This term's a blur to me now. We talked last week about communication, for example, and how you modify communication for different audiences. You need to be trying to get a grip of the culture in your organization. And I'll come on to in a moment. These frameworks, I believe, personally, apply at a company level, but also to a lesser degree at a team level. So what's the culture of that team you're working with. For example, jumping back a slide there, if I can. You may find that in different parts of the organization, we have different elements of culture. A finance team is much more likely to be process orientated. They will have slower feedback. They're working in lower risk environments, like in the accounts team, for example. Whereas if you go to the sales team, it might be much more tough guy macho culture. So it's not necessarily something you can do for your assignment, but it's definitely something you should do in practice, essentially. Anyway, I hope that covered the question. Returning to Cameron and Quinn. So here, the y-axis refers to flexibility and stability versus, and the x-axis, internal versus external. Let me give you an illustration of these. We'll start in the top left this time. So this top left, they call it the clan culture. This is where we're internally focused, but quite flexible. This is generally, the Americans would call this mum and pop stores, where we have, we're all one big happy family. Everyone works together, very collaboration orientated. In the top right corner, this is where we're still quite flexible, but externally focused. A good example will be someone like Google, where there's lots of these flexible, separate teams working in different ways. And the goal is to produce all of these different externally facing products. We can contrast that with bottom right, a market orientation. Here we again have an external focus, but we favor stability over flexibility. A great example is Amazon, where they have a much more control and everything is mapped out, everything is planned, but still that strong customer focus. And our last one, overlapping a bit with process, hierarchy. We're internally focused, we're focused on stability. Government organizations tend to be this way. It's all about rules and universities are often somewhat this way. Rules and regulations, efficiency is the goal. It's all about maximizing and improving our internal processes. But it does feed into lots of things, to come back to you, Amanda. So it feeds into how you should communicate. It feeds into the type of information we want, the reliability, how deep should you go in your analysis. And it also feeds into what the best targets to work on will be. If you are working in a hierarchy orientated company, focus in a bit on process improvement. If you are working for a market or an ad hocracy culture, it will be much more about creating new products. Okay, last one, and then I'll stop talking, I promise. So the Handy model, probably the most famous, talks about 4 types of culture. A power culture is one where the most important person's opinion matters the most, where power comes from the top, where ultimately we're working towards supporting senior management, essentially. A role-based culture is more about the hierarchy of the company. So the director of marketing is responsible for all marketing. If anything goes wrong in marketing, the ultimate buck stops with her. Going down a level, you would then potentially have a head of e-commerce. So they are responsible for everything that goes on in e-commerce. And underneath that, you might have someone in charge of pay-per-click and so on, essentially. So we have this org chart focused mentality. Can lead to the risk of quite siloed work. You're much more likely to be working in individual groups rather than working across groups, essentially. I'll go to the task culture next. So task or project orientation. This is where everything, Google is very like this, where the company is organized around these individual teams working on projects. Lots of pluses for this kind of culture. This is the sort of culture that of all of them is most natural to an analytics team. An analytics team is typically working on projects, likes to work through those in a focused and analytical fashion, pardon the expression. But the real downside we can get in such a culture is that there's a lack of coherence. We're encouraged to work on our projects, and the projects can snowflake out, but also more importantly, a lack of long-term and strategic vision can be a risk. Person culture. So an example of a person culture will be something like Apple, for example, where people are encouraged to bring their own ideas, essentially, and there's a big focus on individualism, and the individualist creative person. So startups tend to go quite this way, where we're looking for lots of new ideas and innovation. The long story, I've spoilt a bit of it by answering Amanda's question already. The point here I want to make is these things aren't fixed. You'll see similarities between all three of these. And it's a theory, right? All models are wrong, some are useful. But thinking about the culture of the company you're working for and also the individual groups you're working for will absolutely inform you on what type of work to be doing. And I think I have one more slide, Francis. Relax for a second. Does that matter? Well, I'll just point you to an old theory from a computer scientist called Melvin Conway, Conway's law. Conway says that ultimately what your culture is will become the products that you produce. The culture that we have, we can see in everything that we do. So as an illustration, on the right-hand side, some years later, which I think sums it up quite perfectly, some of the big tech companies. Google has this very task-based culture, all these individual sub-products. It has that more outwardly facing culture. And we end up with this really complicated mesh of things, all these different projects that get dropped left, right, and center. Really hard to see it as one company and more like a collection of individual projects. Compare that to someone like Apple, where there was a very strong vision from the front, certainly in the Steve Jobs era, and everything worked around that vision. My last one, Microsoft, we have these individual projects, and famously, all of those teams hated each other at Microsoft. And we can see that in the software. Getting PowerPoint to play nicely with Excel, it's a hard thing to do. So yes, it absolutely does matter. It seeps through everything that you do. There we go, young lady.
Okay, so bearing in mind all of that about the culture, where's the analytics function in all of that? Is it, this slide says, is it something that is centralized, either a top-down version or divide and conquer? Or is it decentralized? Is it a bottom-up structure? Now, I guess the answer is, as ever, what's best is it depends. It depends what your culture is, how your organization works, as to which one of these may well serve you best. But as you can see from the slide, there are benefits of each of these different types of structure. What's key to all of this, though, is understanding your organization. This is a framework that we just didn't have time to cover on the module. If we had have had time, we'd have probably put it in the week 3, making sense of problems, because it is a problem structuring style framework that's called the Business Model Canvas. And it's designed to help you get to know your organization, to understand what its goals are. Because when you're thinking about the E part of the Delta Plus analysis, it all depends on you understanding your organization and its goals and where it's heading. So moving on then, we've done data, we've done enterprise, we're now moving on to leadership. Okay, and as this slide points out here, leadership and the right organizational structure are critical to success, much more so than the actual techniques and the technical capabilities that you deploy within your analytics within the organization. And at this point, I will play tag again.
Oh, this is fun, isn't it? Getting my step count up. Yes, so just to carry on that point, when we talked about things like CAPWO, we highlighted the importance of the owner and how the owner will have an ultimate say on whether the project goes ahead or is stopped at any time. So having that buy-in, as Francis has talked about, is absolutely critical. However, sometimes the owner can be a very negative influence, particularly if we have a more power-orientated culture. And sadly, lots of organizations, this quote, it's not clear who this quote is from, so I didn't put the author on it. It's debated, it's ambiguous, but it's a great quote all the same. People use statistics as a drunk man uses a lamppost, for support rather than illumination. The idea is the drunk is leaning on the lamppost because otherwise they're so drunk they would fall over. They're not leaning on the lamppost so they can use the light of the lamppost to see better. What does this mean with statistics? You get all of this idea of lying with statistics, and people, statistics can say anything. A lot of organizations will want their analytics essentially to support the decision that's already been made. I've decided to do this. Go and get some data that makes that look like the right decision. So rather than illumination, rather than using analytics to learn, they're using analytics just to support something that's already been decided. And that's quite often the case in governments, for example, political parties. That's a key thing, but all in many different companies. And it's a dangerous thing. These are pack your bags and run kind of assignments. If you're working for a company like this, doing analytics, you are fundamentally wasting your time. But that takes us from leadership into the T for targets. There's a few things to say about this. And obviously, part of your assignment is to select an appropriate target. How might you go about doing that? So we've got a few ideas we're going to share on this. Often, what we're talking about is, or the dichotomy of choice is one between a more top-down view of projects. Let's try and get the most important project. Let's try and get the project that is blue chip, will attract everyone's attention, and will achieve maximum benefit for the organization. You can take models like, going back a bit, sorry, models like the business model canvas. They help you understand the organization, but they also show you where the main pain points are. What are the main things that are costing the company? Where can we achieve some real value? Most organizations will have a good idea of what their real risk elements are. What are the things that are really hurting at the moment? Or what are the big opportunities we can take advantage of? So there's a model of target selection that says, go and find the biggest thing you can. Go and work on the AI marking system. Go and work on the thing that is really prestige and will catch everyone's attention. Now, obviously, if you want to do this, you absolutely need to have leadership on point. This is going to take you a long time. It's going to cost effort. It's going to cost the effort of not only your team, but also the business as a whole. So if you haven't got that management support, it can't really happen. The alternative is to go bottom up. You pick a larger set of small, safe, relatively easy projects. You take a slow and steady wins the race approach, and you build up a portfolio of success. Once you've got all of these successful analytics projects, you can basically go around the organization and say, look at all the great things that we can do. What can we do for your group? And build up buy-in. Or put another way, the top-down approach is a kind of go hard or go home approach. We're here to do big things, and we're going to go and do them right away. The bottom-up approach is much more based on the idea of building a set of quick wins. Which do you think is best? Which do you think you should do? Which should an organization do? Which approach should you take? It depends is a fantastic answer. I'm not going to accept it depends this time. Come on, give me a different. Do you think you should go big, small, or both? I've hinted you the right answer. Just because I'm running a bit slow, I'm gonna have to go faster than the chat. The correct answer is both, indeed. Well done, Jess, you get the marks. There is a good argument to start with smaller. You might start with one or two smaller projects to bed in the team, start to get that success. You have to at some point, if you're going to start with smaller though, you have to at some point do something worthwhile. There is no point just doing small projects forever. You will not gain any traction in the company, and your group will be disbanded, I can promise you. But if you go only on very big projects, then the amount of stuff you deliver will just not be high enough. And again, your group will be disbanded. There has to be a mix of the two to make this work, essentially. I'm with you. I would probably start with one or two or some smaller projects, but sooner rather than later, you have to do something fairly big and worthwhile if you are actually going to justify the cost you are giving to the organization. And I think that's, oh, I've got one more then, Francis. How do we think about this? How can we think about what is a hard, it's easily said on a slide, right? I can tell you some projects are big and maximum benefit and others are small and easy. How do we translate that to a problem analysis? So this is my own sort of model. I've learned well from business schools that if you want to summarize a thing, they all need to start with the same letter, like the 4 Ps of marketing or whatever. So these are my 6 Cs of target selection. First one's connectedness. How connected is this problem to other operations? So we talked about this a bit when we talked about problem structuring. There are some problems that you can't solve in isolation. They are too connected to other things. If we take on that one thing, really we're taking on all 4 of these things because they are so connected. Criticality is an obvious but important one. How critical is this to operations? Are we changing something that is a critical function of the business, that gets used every day, that is key to customers and so on? Commerciality, is there financial value we can attach to this project? If there's something that's got a lot of monetary benefit or market share benefit, it becomes a bigger project. It becomes a go hard kind of project. Is this relevant to the competition? Is this a key competitive element in the industry? Community. Some things are neither really particularly commercial or particularly valuable, and in part this speaks to an external focus versus an internal focus. If you have a more internal focus, oftentimes the most important things to work on are the things that people just hate. They don't necessarily bring or deny revenue, but they just make everyone's life difficult. Systems that don't work correctly, that are just painful, too slow, or whatever it is. Working through those can certainly make you popular with the business community and can be a big step in the right direction. And then lastly, we can't forget the big people on top. How important is what we're doing to the C-suite, to the senior management? And that's a handover.
Another way of looking at it, okay, as with all of these attributes, there are multiple models you can bring to bear to explore them. So this is simply another one. This is another one that says, how should we go about selecting our projects? And this is taken from the work of Hindle and Vigin, who did some work with the Trussell Trust food bank organisation in the UK. And they undertook an analysis of the organisation using the business model canvas and some other things, some other approaches. And then they developed this analytics leverage matrix to help the organisation, the Trussell Trust, to think about which projects should it consider getting involved in order to develop its analytics capabilities. So we have 2 axes here. On the horizontal axis, we have the analytics difficulty, and on the vertical axis, we have the potential for analytics value creation. And you can see, as with all 2x2s, they've named the 4 boxes. So down on the bottom left, we have low difficulty and perceived low value creation, or low potential for value creation. And they call these fill-ins. So things that you should think about doing, to fill in your time, I guess. Moving up one, we'll go around clockwise. We have the quick wins. These are things which aren't too difficult to do from an analytics technical point of view, but they have the potential for high value creation to the organization. And you can see here that they talk about the geospatial analysis of food banks throughout the UK. So they say that's a quick wins. We should definitely think about doing that. Moving round to the right, we have high technical difficulty, but also high value creation potential. So these are, if you like, the go hard, go home style projects. These are the things that we really should think about putting our efforts in. Like an AI marking system, as Michael reminds me. And then moving down one to the bottom right. These are the things which haven't got an awful lot of value, but they've got a lot of technical difficulty. So we should think about getting out of these areas. These are the go home bits of the big projects, if you like. So that's targets. Moving on swiftly, conscious of time. In the Delta Plus model, we've done data, enterprise, leadership targets. The next one is analysts. So why does it matter? What is the goal of the organization? It shouldn't be just the success of the projects. You need to be thinking about the growth of the organization. Okay, so what does that mean from an analytics maturity point of view? It means you need to build a data literate culture throughout the organizations where champions use the data, the analytics, and the models throughout the business. Now, champions are not just the people at the top, but these may well be champions at various different levels. Over again to Michael.
Well, this is fun, isn't it? Yeah, just to expand, I'll put another point on this. You will know, I'm sure, the famous phrase, you can give a person a fish for a day and they will eat. You can give them a fishing rod and they will eat for a lifetime. And I think this is what we're trying to say on this slide, essentially, right? That we should have that project focus. We should be trying to deliver our projects successfully, as we covered a couple of weeks back. But knowing that when we do so, what we're delivering is fish. We are not automatically delivering fishing rods. What we're advocating for here is that while we work through these projects, and this is a really critical thing in your assessment, you should be highlighting the things you'll do to make the project successful, how you will deliver fish for dinner, but also how in doing this project you can help build the organization's capability, that you can create fishing rods for the organization. And that comes through, it can come in part through creation of systems, IT, for example, which we'll go on into a moment. But fundamentally, that will come as well through working with people, by giving people the power to build their own things and understand and work with data. How do we achieve that? Well, before we go there, let me ask you a different question. And I'll have a quick moment for the chat. Thank you. Does everyone need to be an analyst? Does everyone in your organization need to be an analyst? It's 2025, we're in the world of data. Does everyone need to be an analyst? But no, yes to some degree, no. I think I like the yes to some degree to an extent. It absolutely is the case that every role now, or virtually every role in white collar thought economy work, office work, has an analyst component to it now. When I first after I finished my first degree in film studies, moved swiftly on into a marketing domain. Back in those days, we're very early in the marketing data revolution. Marketing was, about creative ideas and pinstripe suits and drinking wine at lunchtime, the good old days. But if you look at marketing now today, there's so much data available, even in less data obvious, time, I'm going a bit slow, I'll speed up. Even in less data-centric departments such as HR, what you find today is that so much of that has been datafied. So I agree with, to some extent, sort of comments, everyone needs to be an analyst to a degree, which isn't to say everyone needs to get a PhD in data analytics or everyone needs to do a course like you were going on. So Davenport argues for this 4 tiers, that at the very top we have senior management, we have leadership as analytics champions. Then we have this smaller category, 5 to 10% of the workforce, that are analytics professionals. They're the people like you and I who are well trained in analytics and can do complicated things. The tier below us will be the semi-professionals, the people who can use Excel, use Tableau, build dashboards, do simple statistical modeling, but get to good answers. And there's typically going to be more of those, 15 to 20%. The remainder of the organization, they're listed here as analytical amateurs. Whilst they are not specifically analysts in their job title, yes, to some degree, they should be working with data. And we should enable that. We should be helping them get there. We should be creating the tools that do that, things like dashboards, but creating the culture as well. One of the key things I've found a lot of companies working on is the language that we have in that culture. A key part of enabling a data literate culture is to have a common language. But it's very easy, and we do it all the time. We use words like probably. What does probably mean? Does that mean P greater than 0.5, P greater than 0.7? It doesn't have any inherent meaning in and of itself. So I worked with a government group recently where they have literally written out probability from 0 to 1, essentially, and assigned words to each. So highly probable means something that is above 80% probability. Almost certain is something above 0.9 probability. So each of those, when we use that word, we are actually specifically referring to a common probability. When we build dashboards, you're doing this with CMAC at the moment, when we build visualizations, we should fix the rules. We should always use blue for product A, if that's the rule. We should always use orange for product C. Everyone can, whoever made the chart, everyone looks at it and knows straight away what we're talking about. The last one's important. The next one, assign confidence to everything. Again, it's very easy for us to put forward our ideas. What we often don't do and really should is say how confident we are in them. And it's fine to have an idea without much data, without much support yet, but you should make clear what that's based on. It's something we do a lot of in academia. Business needs to do it more. And a key thing I think as well is that we need to think about, we need to create a culture that allows people to challenge. We need to, with or without data. So we need to have a culture where it's not top down, the drunk on the lamppost. People feel empowered to say, I think this is the wrong direction. I have some data that suggests this. It's my intuition. I want to go and find some data to do this. Some of the other bits then more are in my data space. I'll come back to that question in a second. So I've covered a lot of them. Think about the domain influence of your data. Don't just store data, store the domain knowledge that goes with it. When data changes, keep track of this. Data catalogs are going to be critical for 2025 onwards. And think about how much we're going to that single source of truth or whether we're going for something more flexible. Jess, I understand everyone needs to analyze to some extent, but is it realistic for everyone to be an analyst? Different roles have different skill sets. Not everyone's job requires a huge amount of analytical work. No, I completely agree. What I'm not saying to you is that everyone needs to be spending 4 days out of 5 analyzing data. Everyone should be comfortable enough, though, to work with their data. Whatever function you work with, that generates data. And organizations increasingly are wanting to store and analyze that data. You can just ship that data off to an analytics team that is entirely disconnected from that domain, where they have no knowledge of the reality of how people work in it. You can do that, but it's going to be counterproductive. It is far better for us to have both trained analysts, trained analytics people working on that data, but also the people who work in that domain. They may not be data experts. It may not be their full-time job, but they have the domain expertise to put context in that data. And that should be something we encourage everyone to do. You may disagree, it's not hard facts, but that's how I would view modern business. Okay, I'm running a bit short on time, but the good news is I've now grouped the last two together because I think the arguments are the same for both. So we're looking at number 6, technologies, and number 7, analytics techniques. And I think the decision points are basically the same for both. 2 extreme positions. Some organizations, like Google, for example, would be more like the snowflake I've put here. When we say snowflakes, what we're talking about is that you can use whatever you like and any technique you like, any technology you like. Everyone is doing something differently. Every project is a snowflake. Snowflakes because every snowflake is different, right? So every single project is different. Every single project works with different technologies, works with different techniques. There's some merit to that, but there's also some issues, as we'll discuss. The other extreme is like working in a university, I'm sure you'll agree, Colin, where you have all of the rules made about what technologies you can use handed down from the top, where you work in a straitjacket, essentially, where you have very limited control, like a WBS or Warwick, we're told we must use Copilot, irrespective of the fact that Copilot is one of the worst. So we have these things handed down. What you can do is very limited. I've worked at both types of organizations, but also I have worked in multiple roles, fortunately for me. So I've worked in roles that are more data science orientated, where I really want it to be a snowflake. I want to be able to do whatever I like and try all these different models and use all these different technologies. And I've worked a bit on the other side in more ML engineering sort of capabilities, where you're responsible for keeping these systems up. And then your priorities become suddenly very different. So let's talk about snowflakes. Let's talk about the case for snowflakes. We've already argued to you the Maslow quote, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you start treating everything like a nail. There is a very good, pure analytical argument that says for every problem, we should pick the appropriate technique. That shouldn't be hindered by company policy. That should be entirely problem-based. And I completely agree with that to an extent. Further arguments, we just covered that once. The second one, analytics moves fast. Technologies change all the time. Techniques change all the time. If you go onto Archive, you'll see 1,000 different analytical technique papers released every single week. It's really hard to keep up, but keeping up with that pace is an important thing. If we restrict our technology and techniques, quite often we restrict our talent. People don't want to work in our profession in companies that are too restrictive. The more we push that way, the more we put up these barriers, the more we will put people off. Often in analytics, IT, the company, wants you to use things like SAS and Oracle and SPSS and so on, MATLAB, because these are really well-established, well-documented, well-security tested, come with SLAs and guarantees. They're paid for products, and they're really stable and secure. That's often good for the company. The problem for the analysts is that they tend to be very slow. They won't have the new techniques released in there. They tend to be very static, very stodgy, and hard to be flexible with. So you have this constant competing force. Last one, we talked about this a few weeks ago. We never know in analytics. It's not like normal projects. There is just a great deal more uncertainty. The flexibility allows us to pivot into what's best for our project. Let's go the other way around then for straitjackets. The first one, I think, is a key one. Analytics is now big business. We're not just some geeks in the cellar, not allowed to talk to anyone crunching our numbers. We are now mainstream. As we become mainstream, we have to tend to follow the rules that everyone else does. That also includes the threat of cybersecurity. A lot of the hackers and so on have evolved their approaches. AI applications, for example, there's an awful lot of risk in our AI applications of being hacked. We've gone from SQL injections to people just being able to write a document and potentially inject. There was a paper from Anthropic last week about code injections in models and how you can make a nice, well-behaved LLM to a daemon just with a few lines of text. So yeah, absolutely, we need to have that level of control to prevent from very real threats. When you have a bunch of snowflakes, when you have everyone doing things differently, how do you manage that? How can you audit it? You need to be an expert in everything to be able to read everyone's code. How do we maintain that as an IT function? How do we keep all of these different applications running? We just can't have that level of expertise. If we have one product, one like SAS or something, it's much, much easier. We just need to have experts in SAS. We can keep everything running. You can't have that many experts. It also means that things are naturally more brittle, more likely to break, more likely to be open source. Last point on this one, the more we go for complexity, the more we push towards these different snowflakey, complex systems, we often sacrifice explainability and the understanding in our organization. Last one, sorry, I lied, the killed by Google problem. So this is a fun statistic on 2025 on how many Google projects get killed. So of all the products that Google's made in the last 5 years, less than 50% still run. More than 50% have been discontinued. It's not just a Google problem, but it's a well-known problem in Google. It's probably worse in Google than anywhere else. This is what happens when we have all of these snowflakes. Someone comes in, they build an exciting new product. It does well, it gets traction, it gets users. That person gets promoted, leaves that project, goes and does a management job, or goes to another company like Facebook or OpenAI. What happens to that product? Well, there's no one there to support it anymore, and eventually it just gets discontinued. Last point from me. Having worked on both sides, the data science and the more production-orientated ML engineer side, it's also worth noting a big difference in the philosophy of those roles. Often in development, like you guys are doing in AIP right now, we want to get this fantastic model. We're happy to make it complicated. We're trying to do the coolest thing we can to get the best possible score we can, the highest accuracy, or whatever it is that you are measuring. More times than I care to mention, we've had those sort of products come from data science. So it will be notebooks, really complicated ones, really complicated models, lots of hacks and things going on. And the first thing we've done is just try to simplify them as much as possible. This is a little bit extreme on the slide, but it's very possible that you go from a sort of complicated deep neural network, like we'll talk about next term, in development, to something much more simple like a logistic regression. Why do we want this? The logistic regression is stable, it's simple, it's easy to scale, it's easy to move, it's easy to update. We will sacrifice 5% accuracy quite often if we can have all of those qualities. So quite often, that flexibility isn't actually required. I think that's my last slide. So no, I'm going to skip that one for time. I've talked about it already. Let's do putting it together. Sorry, Francis.
Hey, no.
I talk too much. It's my fault. I apologize.
No, no worries, Michael. No. So, where have we been? You start off with your delta plus analysis. That tells you how you score each of the delta plus attributes. You average the score. That tells you where you currently are in terms of your organizational analytics maturity. You then prioritize each of the delta plus attributes. That gives you an indication of what you think needs to be worked on most urgently. You then have to decide, what are you going to do? Now, in your assessment, what we ask you to do is to say, pick a project, come up with a new project that will help improve the analytics capability of the organization. So what should that project touch on? Should it focus on data? Should it focus on enterprise leadership? Should it cut across different delta plus areas? So going through your assessment, delta plus analysis, prioritization, then in terms of thinking of your project, you need to be thinking more broadly about your plan for moving forward. Where is it that you want to move your organization to? Have you currently assessed them as 2.3 overall with the analytics score? So they'll be at stage 2. Do you want to simply nudge them up to stage 3? Do you want to try and do big jumps up to stage 4? How are you going to do that? What sort of project could you recommend? Now, you might say to me, yeah, but we need multiple projects. Sure you do. But for your assessment, we ask you just to pick one project. Okay. So think about where it is you want to move the organization to. And then for your project, think about which of the delta plus elements do you want to address. You don't have to address the one that you've highlighted as priority 1, as Michael said earlier. You might well want to focus on other of the areas. You might want to, rather than strengthen a weakness, you might want to continue building on some of the things that are your strengths. So, then with your assessment, just very, very briefly, what is it that you're being asked to do? You've picked a project. You've then got weeks 2 to 8 of themes. So going from stakeholders all the way through to communicating to different audiences, that we ask you to pick 2 of those themes to analyze your project and then to come up with some recommendations for how your project is going to be successful and thus improve your delta plus score and the analytics maturity of the organization. So I'm going to go through this again next week when we review the module and talk a bit about the assessment. But we wanted to give you a bit of a heads up this week. And indeed, somebody asked me at one of the workshops last week if we could touch on the assessment this week. So I hope you can see how this week's material is relevant to your assessment. And I think that's it. So do you want to add anything?
I'm just going to add one thing. And I appreciate we're 1 minute over. We've covered a lot of things today, intentionally so, though. So there's a lot of depth we've covered. Some of this stuff will be more relevant depending on which project you go for. So we've tried to think of all of the range of work you might do as your proposed project, both in the assessment but in the real world as well. So some of these things will be more or less relevant. Remember that there's lots of these different competing models, and all models are wrong, some are useful. But what it just highlights is that we need to have both a project level thinking, but also that more macro, how do we build the organization thinking.
Fab. So to end, here's this week's quiz. So please undertake it now, because the quiz relates to the content that we've covered in the lecture. So it'll be fresh in your memory now if you do it now. And we look forward to seeing you either today for the workshops or tomorrow afternoon.
And yeah, I appreciate this late in the term, but it's going to be lots of fun, this workshop, so do come.
Yeah, there'll be chocolate as well.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.